The way we were racing was, taking a knife to a gunfight. At Stewart House Racing, we just raced different.
The teams have too much control. At some point, we have to blow the thing up.
I've got rid of every distraction that I have. I just want to smash them.
California's Kevin Harvick does it.
Welcome to Kevin Harvick's Happy Hour, presented by NASCAR on Fox. I figured it was a good time for a mid-season update with my old buddy, good friend, old crew chief, Rodney Childers. So thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, so I guess the big question is, I know what you've been up to, but tell everybody else what you've been doing.
Hanging out with you a lot. I've been enjoying going over to KHI and working on the late models, normally about 3 days a week, and going with them on the weekends. And, just going to those Cars Tour races. And honestly, it's been a ton of fun, getting to work with Landon, getting to watch Keelan race. Just a great group of guys that work really hard. And, that's kind of my roots. I enjoy being around the late model stock cars and just a lot of fun.
Well, I mean, that it's your fault that that thing even exists. That's your fault, right?
I was actually thinking about that this morning. That was kind of my doings from the get-go, but it's all worked out good. It's been really cool to see it grow over the last few years and what it's been able to do. And the people that you've assembled over there in the shop is great. So it's neat to see, how far it's come.
Yeah, when you look at a kid like Landon, I think that we've seen this a few times now. Lane Riggs, he got in the car and won, and all of a sudden his career kind of took off. Josh Berry really set the precedence as far as being able to run the late model stock and get into something else and move on. Now you see Butterbean moving on. When you look at a kid like Landon, we'll just use Landon because we know him, for instance, how has the Cars Tour kind of changed the dynamic of what a young driver can do from a late model standpoint to get the recognition that he's getting on the Cars Tour and being able to get in these next vehicles, as we've seen with those guys, and be competitive, kind of changed the whole landscape of what you can do in a late model stock and jump in the next vehicle.
Yeah, and I've always said, really my whole life, that late model stock car racing is probably one of the hardest things out there. It's the most competitive. You see it week in and week out, just how close qualifying is throughout the field. But it's just a great place to learn. You're racing against some of the best people there is. And, to be able to do that on TV every single week and have a big audience is huge. And, to go do it at North Wilkesboro and FS1 and just a lot of different things that we've been able to do with this is just grown and grown and grown. And, there's no better place for a young kid to be able to get recognized right now.
And I think the part so I didn't grow up on the East Coast with late model stock racing, but our late models were very similar to what they are now. Owning and watching the West Coast kind of get back organized and regroup, it's a much different environment than it is on the East Coast because people are doing it for a living. And the intensity that comes with late model racing on the East Coast, it's competitive on the West Coast, but these guys are not necessarily all doing it for a living. Most of the Cars Tour late model stock teams are racing for a living, and you can do it by not racing for a living. That just it changes the competitive environment. And for me, it was a little bit eye-opening in the beginning, just because I didn't really recognize late model racing as ever getting to that point of being that competitive. But I don't think that's slowed down, do you?
No, not at all. And coming back to it this year, and after we went to the first few races and we won a couple of them and had, really dominant cars, I realized real quick that the whole infield was not okay with us doing that. So it is. It's, these guys are out here doing it for a living, and they work extremely hard at it. And, their expectation is the same as anybody else. They expect to go out there and win and provide for whoever's driving the car, and and put on the best show you can. But it's definitely a different landscape than what it is in some areas.
As you look at, you look at the truck teams and all the people that are looking for up and coming drivers. We're around Landon, so we know that Landon does a good job. Who do you think some of the other young guys coming through the system that have the potential to come out of there and have a chance at moving forward.
Well, my number one would be Keelan.
Yeah.
But,
Well, he's still a little young.
We still
Yeah.
got a few years for
Yeah.
that. But, there's so many good ones. There really is. Butterbean was the standout for, the last few years. And, obviously Landon and Connor are racing for the championship right now. But there's a lot of other good ones too. There really is. And it's not just, in the Cars Tour, there's a lot of good late model stock car drivers throughout the East Coast. So,
I like the Luke Baldwin kid.
Yeah.
I think he does a great job. I just love his approach and his, I think that there's something to be said for that racing pedigree that goes with a kid that can manage his personality and his emotions. And obviously they all get out of whack at certain times, but they've seen it. And I like the way he goes about it. And it seems like he can get in anything and
he
go.
can get in anything and go fast and win. And I think the most impressive thing is, he didn't really start iRacing until he was 15 years old.
Isn't that wild?
And, I actually had that conversation with them because the boys, bugging me like they should have raced. And they're like, well, Luke didn't start till he was, late. But, it's crazy to see that, going on. And I got to talk to Tommy at Darlington, and both boys finished first and second, right that Saturday night of, Darlington weekend. So I can only imagine what that feels like as a father to watch both of them go out there and do that. So just pretty special for that family, I'm sure.
So you've done the late model stock stuff. You've been away from the Cup garage a little bit now, and where does your heart lie as far as what you want to do going forward? Obviously, you've won a Cup championship, you've won 40 races, and I was looking down the crew chief list today of, I think that Alan Gustafson and maybe it was Paul. I think it was Paul Wolf are the only guys that are even close to that, and so, your experience and everything that you've been able to go through, where does that lead your thoughts as you go forward?
Yeah, I mean, April 22nd, I knew, over the next few months, it was going to be a big learning curve for me, a lot of emotion to try to figure out what's next. For some reason, it's been hard to just, say I'm done by any means. I still miss it. I think it's just the competitive part of it that I miss the most. I enjoy winning races. I'm a little quiet at it, but, even when Landon wins, I try not to get all up in the middle of it. But, that's all I've ever done. That's what I've done my whole life, is to race and to win races and compete. And so I don't really know what's next. I still want to race. I still want to win races. I feel like I need some more on my pedigree and on my record. So, I'm just trying to figure it out one day at a time and just figure out what's next.
When you look at the timing of it, I don't think it could have been worse as far as in my opinion, the Cup garage really starts to work. Really, any of the garages start to work now. Middle of August through the end of the year is kind of how it all works. How have you been able to even have any conversations with anybody? Because a lot of the teams are so in the middle of the season that it seems like it's tough. From that standpoint.
It's been really tough. It really has. And I think some of the things that are going on in the Cup garage are making it even tougher right now from my standpoint. So, it's hard to say what's going to happen. I mean, to me as an outsider looking in, there's teams that need to do something different, and they're not doing things the right way. They're just not racing the way that they need to race. And, whether that's a job opening or not, I don't really know, but, there's plenty of other stuff around. It's been kind of crazy. The last month, it's been the truck garage that has been the most supportive.
Yeah.
I never expected that 2 months ago. It was pretty quiet. And then now all of a sudden there's a lot of interest there.
Well, it's going to get more competitive.
It really is.
With Dodge
it
coming
seems
in.
that way. Yeah. It does seem that way. So, I'm still trying to just, weed through it one day at a time and just figure it out.
So when you look back, I look at Briscoe and I hear him talk about his car and the way that how much different it drives from the cars that he drove at Stewart-Haas Racing. And it got me really intrigued from the crew chief standpoint, how that dynamic changed. When you went from the old car to where we are today, what is the process and everything that you think has changed from Gen 6 to Gen 7 and how the crew chief operates and runs the team?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it eats me up to see what, people say that I'm not good at a next gen car because, these days,
Well, first off, you're in a shit situation.
Yeah.
Okay. Because when the whole the beginning of the failure and the close down of Stewart-Haas Racing really started a couple years before that.
Yeah.
You could kind of see the bottom was falling out of Stewart-Haas Racing. And maybe you saw it different. But when those resources start to deteriorate, Ford shifted a lot of their support to Penske. Penske became, and Stewart-Haas just slowly lost piece by piece. But I think now when you're seeing Briscoe and Josh Berry and all these guys go to teams that are fully intact and functioning, it was the beginning of the end was a couple, 2 or 3 years before it shut down.
Yeah, and I saw that same thing from Briscoe, and that's how it is. I mean, there's big organizations that have this car figured out from the smallest details. One thing at a time. There's 1,000 pieces to put the puzzle together, and you have to do all of them exactly perfect. And obviously they have really, really good cars right now. Even watching the race yesterday, anybody that was in one of those cars was extremely fast. And
Toyota's come to play.
Yeah, for sure. So, and from your past, that just makes your toolbox easier to work in, right? I mean, your springs don't have to be perfect. Your shocks don't have to be perfect. You don't have to hit your heights exactly perfect every week. You just have a better car. And that's so much easier to race that way. The way we were racing was, taking a knife to a gunfight, and it's just extremely hard to do it that way. But, to go back to your question, though, is, the crew chief has to manage the people more than anything, has to run the ship and keep the ship steered in the right direction and help run the organization and keep the organization steered in the right direction. And, it's mainly the engineers that are working on the setups and going to the simulator and doing all those things. And, every team is different. I sat, beside Billy Scott last weekend and talked for a long time. And his department is different than what mine would be if I was there, right? He's still coming up with setups for all 3 cars at 2311 and does a really good job at it. So everybody's different. Every team works a little bit different. And there's even some of them that are different within an organization, you know? So, I think you just have to find those puzzle pieces that work for your organization and figure it out from there.
And I think that when Stewart-Haas Racing was at its best, it was about the fabricators, the aero department. You could make differences. And I think that when it went to a structured, organized, very detailed piece of the puzzle from every piece being a part that matters, I think that's really when the company needed to be restructured in how it worked. And I think that that's a Gen 7 thing. I think Penske was more buttoned up from a detail standpoint. I think that, I still think a Gibbs, Hendrick, I think a lot of those were a little more structured from that standpoint. I still think that it changed all of them, though. Am I wrong in thinking that?
No, and it was just the way that different organizations were run, like you were saying. Like Penske was really buttoned up at the time, and they were kind of ready for a car like this. The way that they operated in the shop, and obviously they've gone out and won 3 championships in a row or whatever. So I felt like they were ready for it from the get-go. They had some supercar experience and all those different things. And, at Stewart-Haas Racing, we just raced different. Even today, people, say that I like doing things my way. That was the only way we could race there. It wasn't that I liked doing things my way, but I was going to hold people accountable and do it our way because that's the only way we could race. And different places were, didn't race that way.
Yeah.
They had a lot of structure and all those different things. But Stewart Haas Racing was just a bunch of racers, and we just worked our guts out. And with the new car, you can't do that. You really can't just outwork somebody. I mean, you have to have all the pieces and parts and the details figured out, and every single piece and part has got to be pushed to the limit. And some people are able to do that.
Yeah, and I think I think that the more that, and the 19 is still Briscoe's car. Listening to he and James talk, because it's really interesting when you go back and you look at a Truex situation where didn't win many races at the end, seemed like fast cars, but it sounds like didn't put the time in that Briscoe is now putting in from a simulation standpoint, time at the shop, whatever that is. And listening to James compare Briscoe and Martin, the effort level from the driver department is much higher. And I think that, like, when you go back, I mean, obviously everybody kind of knows our relationship. We didn't go a day without texting, talking about something about our race car. And then, I don't know how your relationship was with Justin. Was it the same, not the same? But listening to James and Briscoe talk about it, I mean, it sounds like they're in there all the freaking time from a simulator standpoint. How is that important? Even if a sim session doesn't go bad, how does that relate to what you put in the car, how it goes to the engineers, and how does that, because we hear a lot of the drivers don't do it, we hear some that do it a lot. How does that help the engineering side from a time standpoint when it's low or high?
I've always said any communication's good communication.
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
So, going to the simulator and talking about things, that's just more communication, and it helps every standpoint of it. Yes, there's weeks that the simulator, the tire model's not perfect, and you go off the simulator and you unload at the racetrack and you're off, right? But there's organizations that have put in the effort and have their tire models figured out, and they show up at the racetrack and it matches. And I think that's where the 19 is right now. I mean, if you're spending that much time a week in there and you're showing up and your car's fast right off the truck, then that's the circle that you want to keep connected, is to keep all those dots going in the right direction. And there's other times. I mean, we had that, this year at the beginning of the year, I was new to the Chevrolet side of things. My engineer was new to the Chevrolet side of things. And there was a couple of races that we went off the simulator and we weren't very good when we unloaded. And there was other races that we were good at the simulator and we unloaded really, really, really good. So, that's just part of figuring that out and having good communication, believing in each other, and working through it every week. But, you don't have a lot of tools anymore, right? I mean, you don't have, a lot of testing. You don't have a lot of practice. So all you got is a simulator.
Yeah.
And you got to make it work.
When you look at this car, obviously there's been a lot of talk, and you and I were involved in it from the beginning. We've seen a lot of rule changes with the car, even though that doesn't look like it. There's been a lot of time and effort put in from NASCAR's standpoint to talk about, what they could do to the car. But we've gone from super big spoilers to small spoilers to the tires seem to have moved the needle as much as they can. What do you think that they can do to the car to make it so that it races better and is less bad behind each other in traffic? I mean, let's just say you had a clean sheet of paper with the chassis. What can they do to the car to make it so that it races better?
Yeah, I mean, you can always kind of pinpoint to the underbody maybe causing some of the stuff in traffic. I still think the tires are too wide. I think you could narrow up the wheel from the inside, leave the outside of the wheel where it's at, the face of the wheel, and just bring the inside of the wheel outboard basically and narrow up the tires a couple inches. But
the tires have moved the needle more than anything.
That's how I have felt from the get-go.
Yeah.
It's all about what's connecting the car to the track that's going to make the most difference, whether you're on a go-kart, whether you're in a late model, whether it's a cup car. That's really what's going to make the most difference. So, it's hard to throw away a bunch of race cars. It's hard to throw away a bunch of bodies, a bunch of floors that cost a lot of money. Wheels cost a lot of money, but they're not near as bad as throwing away race cars. And, I think it would be worth trying. It would cost a lot of money on Goodyear's standpoint to redo molds and do all that stuff. But, we have to do what's right for the sport, and it would be worth looking into that. I don't know on the car side. They have tried all kinds of stuff. They really have.
Nothing from an aero side has moved the needle.
It really hasn't.
God knows how much NASCAR has spent.
I think
on the aero side.
If you could narrow up the tires and give them more power, I know they're in a tough box on the power standpoint, and they want to keep it in a situation where new manufacturers can come in, and I understand that, but at some point we need to try it. I remember the first day we put those plates on going into 2015, we were like, man, I don't know if this is good. And then, that first next gen test at Charlotte, we put a bigger plate on it without really asking anybody.
Oh my
and
God.
Man, it made a ton of difference. So I can only imagine going that next step, and being able to use the brakes more and get the min corner speed down, where they're at. If you had more power and a smaller tire, that min corner speed would come way down.
Yeah.
And that's really where we need to get.
Yeah, because that day when we did the first next gen test, they had the power was awful, and they were as bad as they are now in traffic. Can you imagine what it would have been like if we'd have started the next gen cars with the low power that they had unloaded that day?
I can only imagine.
It was awful.
Yeah.
And NASCAR had finally given up on the test that day, and just nothing was working. Nothing was making anything better. And what did we do? Who'd we call?
Doug Yates.
Yeah, we called Doug Yates. Yeah, so we called Doug Yates, and Doug sent over a bigger restrictor plate. And before it was all said and done, I don't know that NASCAR really appreciated the fact that when they said do anything that we put a bigger restrictor plate on, but it definitely moved the needle. And the next thing you know, you had half the garage over there saying, what in the hell just happened?
Yeah.
Why did you do this? And then the next thing you know, everybody realized that it needed more power. But I know we talk about the power thing, and we talk about the manufacturers. Obviously, we see Dodge coming into the sport and doing the things that they're doing. You see the new wiring harness and things that are starting to happen with, some of the changes that are going to be made to the car. But I'm like you, I don't really understand why we just don't put a bigger restrictor plate on there to see what another big horsepower increase. I think right now they gave them enough power to just tell everybody that they gave them some more power. It's not going to move the needle unless you get 100, 150 more horsepower. And I understand that the manufacturers and the engines, it takes time to get the parts, but at some point, I'm like you, don't you need to try it, even if it's just for the short tracks and road courses?
Yeah, and to me, I feel like, and if Doug was standing here or Scotty Maxim, they might tell you something different, but I've always felt like the durability side comes from the RPM. We can make 900 horsepower engines that turn 7,800 RPM and will last 5 races.
Yeah.
I don't think it would be that hard. If we're gonna go back to trying to run 9,800 RPM, yeah, they're gonna tear up a lot of stuff, right? But
sometimes I think the engines need to blow up every once in a while.
Well, for sure.
I really do. I think the engines don't blow up enough. We don't have enough stuff like that happen during the race. And I know that's not what the teams and the engine manufacturers want to hear, but I think that the teams have too much control. They have too much control of the rules. Manufacturers, they'll do probably whatever they have to do, but at some point we have to try to blow the thing up to make it better in a big way. And I don't know if there's any merit to when you go back and look at the Le Mans car that Hendrick built, and you look where the fuel cell is, and you look at all the weight and all the different aero devices.
Yeah.
To me, it's all kind of sitting there with some different ideas of things that they did with that car to be able to move the needle, because the things that we're doing haven't worked. But I think even from the weight side, that car's heavy.
Yeah.
Could you even get 200 or 300 pounds of weight out of it? With the floors, and there'd be a bunch of things that have to change.
Yeah, it would be a bunch of things that would have to change. You can get some weight out of the body, if it went to a full carbon body, that you could start getting some weight out of it. The greenhouse is still pretty heavy. There's some other parts and pieces that are still pretty heavy, but I think they're trying to figure it out one day at a time. I know a little bit. I talked to Probes. They have a lot of CFD going on in the background that a lot of people don't hear about, and
They do it. NASCAR actually does a lot of work with it, but they're just not moving the needle.
Yeah.
That's the hard part.
Yeah, I think the only thing that's going to move the needle is what's connecting it to the track and burn the tires off, burn the brakes off, and do all those things that we used to do.
Yeah, and it's such an interesting dynamic as far as the the way that the car is developed. And in my opinion, I think one thing that NASCAR has learned, they used to just say, hey, we're going to change the rules, and the teams figured out how to do the work. And now you've got parts sitting on the shelf, you've got engines sitting on the shelf, you've got all these things that you have to buy that you've promised the vendor that they're going to sell. It seems really complicated to go through that process. So, how motivating has this whole little break for you been? I think that I know that you touched on it a little bit earlier, but I think anytime that something happens that you're like, yeah, I can show them that I can do this way better.
I just want to smash them.
Yeah,
I really do.
That's dangerous. I've seen that.
It's put me in a situation where I just want to prove a point. And, over time, I had accumulated some things. And as you know, I like going and riding UTVs and doing different things. And, over this time, I've got rid of every distraction that I have. I have no more distractions. And the only distraction I have is a family and kids and maybe going to a cross-country meet. But, whenever this next opportunity comes about, it's going to be 24/7, and I'm not going to lay down. I'll be the first one there and the last one to leave, and we'll see what happens from there.
Yeah, and I think that you tell me this. I think that the crew chief role in today's world, when these guys are done or you're ready to I think there's another step now. I think that the Gen 7 car puts you in a position to lead an organization as well from a competition standpoint, more so than it ever has from a crew chief role. Is that fair, unfair?
I agree 100%. And you look at what Gabehart's doing at JGR. Gabehart is, we grew up together. We raced together. We raced go-karts together, late models together. We did all that stuff. And, really, you want to work for somebody that's a good leader, that's a good person, that has your back through thick and thin. And, I feel like I could do that. If the crew chiefing thing was over with, I feel like I can lead a group. I feel like people would want to come work for me. They would know that I've got their back and would support them and give them the best tools that I can and all those things. So, it's in a weird spot right now.
Yeah.
I don't know how it's all going to happen, and we're just going to take it one day at a time and figure it out.
So you've been able to watch now. The big topic, one of the big topics lately has been the points, the championship. Is it exciting, not exciting? What is your opinion on the whole points piece of it? I don't think it's a 36 race all out points, but I think points should matter way, way, way more than what they do. As you've watched now and you've seen all the banter, where do you sit on all that?
It's interesting because as a crew chief, you sit on the pit box and you work your guts out and you're just thinking the whole race, and you get done with a race and you're like, man, that was a good race. And then you get on the airplane and you look at your phone and everybody's talking about it was a bad race. I'm like, well, I didn't see it that way from the pit box.
Yeah.
And after you sit at home for 4 months and you watch all of them on TV, there's some of them that are different than what it would have felt like on the pit box for sure. And some of that is whether you're competitive that day or not, from a pit box standpoint. So, there's been a few of them that I'm like, man, we got to do something different to make this show a little bit better. But there's other ones that have been really good races.
Yeah.
I think me and you never liked going to the new Atlanta, but it's been probably
pretty damn exciting to watch.
That's about the best one I've seen on TV.
Yeah.
So, this weekend at Bristol will be exciting. It always puts on a good race, and to me, it does. It's one of my favorite places.
So do we need cutoff races? Do we need 3 or 4 races at the end? Do we need a playoff champion? What do we need?
Yeah, to go back to the points thing. doing 36 races would be pretty boring at times. You look back at those years like 2015 for us, or 2018, 2020. Lord, we would have won the points.
Yeah.
What?
I think
races
I
before
won that
the end.
Xfinity championship one year by 820 points.
So we don't need that as a sport, but I don't know what we need. I've kind of got some interest in what it would look like doing the last 3 races. I've heard that kind of thrown around quite a bit.
I like that.
I think it's better than one race.
Yeah.
I mean, just one race at one track is, if we're not going to move it around every week, one organization kind of figures out a track and, they can just go win every year, and I don't think we want that. So, I think we try to move it around a little bit more, try to do the last 3 race deal. And, if you have a bad race, you have a bad race. But it would definitely be exciting that way, I believe.
So who are your final 4? You had to pick today.
Man, I always pick Christopher Bell every time.
Yeah.
I just like what he does. I really do. I think Briscoe can get there. I think Denny Hamlin might be his year that he can get it done. I think the relationship with Chris Gale's been good, and I think it's only got better throughout the year.
Yeah.
But the normal guys, the William Byrons and Kyle Larson. I think the biggest thing would be interesting and just to see if Blaney can make it to the Final 4. I think Blaney and Logano have always got a shot, right? But the Fords haven't had the speed that they need.
Light switch hasn't gone off.
Yeah,
to
the
start
light
the playoffs.
switch hasn't started like it normally does. So, and Gateway has always been one of their best tracks. So it'd be interesting to see what they can do over the next few weeks. That 5 car will be extremely fast this weekend at Bristol, and but I feel like the light switch has flipped for the Toyotas since the playoffs started. And when somebody can do that, they're going to be hard to beat.
Yeah. So who's your champ? You can only pick one. You didn't even pick 4 for me. So
I
now,
know.
Now I'm going to make you pick one.
I'm still going to go with Christopher Bell.
Okay.
I think the last few years he's deserved to be there and had a shot at it and hadn't quite had it. Hadn't got to victory lane for the championship, but they've got a good team. They've got a good crew chief. I know he wasn't happy after the race yesterday, but Adam's the kind of guy that can rally behind him and make it happen.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time. It was good to catch up. I know everybody's always interested in what's going to happen, so we'll be waiting around to see how it all turns out. So thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.